Hey guys, first and foremost, this video is entirely about the motorhome and entirely about motorhome repairs. So if that's not your cup of tea, no worries. We got plenty more content coming very soon. If you do happen to own one of these things with a hydronic heating system, then this video is definitely for you. I want to give a huge thanks here to Mike with Zmotorsports. Thank you so much for subscribing to our little old YouTube channel here. If it wasn't for you, I don't know that I would have ever figured out what was wrong with this thing. And because of your videos, I felt extremely confident going into replacing this fuel pump myself. Guys, it turns out if you need to do this, it's not really difficult. There's a lot of little tedious parts, so just be patient, take your time. If you got any kind of common sense about you, you can do these repairs also and save yourself a ton of money. You should really hop over to Mike's channel, Zmotorsports. He has a lot of in-depth videos about the hydr-hot, and his video about the fuel pump replacement is definitely a nut and bolt replacement video. It will not steer you wrong on how to do this. So Mike, thank you, Zmotorsports, and we are going to get on into this thing and show you what it took to get it fixed, and then we're going to show you the end results. Well, better pop a chair up. This may take a while. Oh, looky there, the beloved hydr-hot system. Oh, how much I hate to love this thing, or love to hate this thing, whichever way you want to call it. This has been the nemesis of our motorhome since we have ever had it. When it works absolutely fantastic. I love this thing. The other 6 days out of the week when it doesn't work, I absolutely despise this thing. We have had nothing but trouble with it since we've had our motorhome. We had issues where the water would be really, really hot, and all of a sudden it would go completely cold, and that was the end of that. It would never get warm again. Shut the system down completely. Wait for a while, turn it back on, let it cycle. Hot water for a few seconds. Search the group forum, search the messages page, anything and everything. Anti-scald valve. So we replaced the anti-scald valve, which if you have ever done on one of these things, and while it seemingly is just right there, it is a complete pain in the butt to get that thing out. And a nerve-wracking experience because of the way it is mounted, and if you crack any one of these fittings, you are absolutely done. Toast. Did not fix the problem. We have replaced fuel filters, flushed the freshwater side with calcium remover, and while we did get a lot of crap out of it, it still did not fix the problem. Chunked a whole bunch of money at this thing just to try to fix the problem with the hot water. Nothing worked. It actually turned out to be something so stupidly simple, it was unreal. It was the glycol mixture. Yes, that may seem stupid enough, but we had no idea when we bought the motorhome that all it was the glycol mixture was wrong. It had entirely too much glycol in it. We completely flushed the system out, got it back to we started out with a 50-50 system. Worked great after that. We had all the hot water in the world we ever wanted to. Now, realistically, that may not be the most perfect blend for us. We live in South Texas. We try not to travel a lot in the really cold environments. And I've actually kind of changed the mixture up now to where it's really more, say, 40-60-ish mixture. I do run a little bit more water in it than I do the glycol. It has actually helped a whole lot with the heating of the water. On to the next problem. This thing has smoked ever since we've ever had it. And again, on the forums, we changed the fuel filters. We've taken the blower assembly completely out, the burner tube completely out, polished that thing till it looked like a chrome mirror, and nothing would ever work until I came across a video the other day of a gentleman. As to why he subscribed to our little old YouTube channel, I will never know, but I am so forever thankful for him. and I am going to mention him as much as I can because of absolutely how wonderful his videos are on these things. And his name is Mike, and he runs a YouTube channel called Zmotorsports. And if you don't go check out his videos on these hydr-hot systems, you're wasting your time. He does the most in-depth video on this system and the things that it does and how it works that I have ever seen in my life. And I am so thankful for you, Mike, because your recent video about the fuel pump that you replaced on your hydr-hot led me to believing that that is probably the issue that is wrong with ours. And while it works great, we have great hot water, I am along with you, sir. I cannot stand the blue smoke that comes out of the exhaust, even if it is just a little tiny puff. It is the most embarrassing. There's my helper. No job can ever be completed without a proper helper. It is absolutely embarrassing to be in a campground and the hydr-hot system fire up and it is a blue smoke bomb traveling across the campground, and it absolutely reeks of diesel fuel. It drives me nuts, so much to the point that I was almost ready to take the whole entire system out and go back to a traditional hot water heater, which we have lived with for a very long time in a travel trailer that we owned prior to this, and we had no issues. This I've had nothing but issues with. But Mike, I believe it is the fuel pump. So we are going to change the fuel pump because, as you stated in your videos, when I take the thing apart, I do see a lot of residual diesel fuel in there. And it only leads me to believe that it is leaking diesel around the shaft that drives the pump, and it is leaking into the housing, and then it is simply blowing unburnt fuel into the burn chamber that has not been atomized through the fuel nozzle. And I believe that is what the problem. So we're going to get this lovely piece of fine equipment taken apart again, and we are going to change the fuel pump and hopefully end the nightmare with the hydr-hot system. Now, I'm almost positive that Mike is actually going to be envious as to how easy our system is to actually access. You see, he has an absolutely gorgeous Monaco, but they buried their system kind of far into the motorhome. So I feel for you, man, whenever you have to get to yours. But these things are actually kind of easy to get to. There's just a few screws right here. Take the screws out. There's an access door. You can reach in there and take some more screws out, and this whole entire panel comes off, and boom, everything is right there. And boom, just like that, there it is. So there's a massive wiring. Here's your circulation pumps for your zones. Here's your blower assembly. Your fuel pump is housed on the end of that up inside there. Your control module. It's very easy to get these things apart, really. We're going to pop the control module off. There's a couple of 10 millimeter nuts, one up here, one down on the other side. I don't know what they're called, T-bolts or something maybe. Anyways, you loosen the nuts, you fold the tabs up, boom, this whole assembly comes out. So we're going to get the blower assembly out, then we can actually see what's going on in there. Okay, so there's the blower assembly, the fuel pump, the nozzle, everything that's involved in that is right there in that one housing. And like I say, to get that thing out, all we did was we just took the module off the side of it. We unplugged the main harness right here. This harness right here that goes into here. We have these two fuel lines here to disconnect, and that's it. Boom, we can take this whole thing out. And that piece right there just goes up inside. That's your burner tube assembly. You can see how, I mean, we've cleaned it so many times anyways, but, you know, but those two little bolts I was talking about right here, there's just two of them, and they just kind of fold out of the way, and then they clip over an ear right here, and then you just snug the nut up, and that's all that holds that thing in, really and truly. But as Mike talks about in his video, if we take this thing apart, and I just had it apart here recently and cleaned everything up. As you can see, if we wipe our fingers all over the end of this thing, that's diesel. And it's all down here on the pump area and everything. So it just leads me to believe that, as Mike states, the drive shaft for the pump, I believe it's leaking into there. And then it's getting raw fuel down inside there, and then the blower actually blows the air across this thing, and that atomizes the fuel, and these are the igniters, and poof, that's what lights it off. So I'm just pretty sure that it's unburnt. I mean, not necessarily unburnt, but it is unatomized fuel getting into the burn chamber, causing the air-fuel ratio to be way off, and that's what's causing all the smoke. So we're going to change this little dude, and it's quite a process to, not hard, but it's quite a process to actually get to that fuel pump. Now, Now, I'll stress right off the get-go that this is not necessarily an exact nut and bolt how-to video. If you want that, again, Mike Zmotorsports has the most intuitive video on completely stripping one of these things down that I have ever watched. So we'll just give a quick overview and we'll get it all blowed apart and show you. But this is the actual fuel pump here. But to access that pump, we've got to get the photo stand off here. We got to get the igniters off of here, essentially the spark plugs, if you want to think about it that way. All the ignition leads that go to that. This is your fuel shutoff solenoid. So you notice when you first turn your hydr-hot on that it just blows just air. And then it will later, within a few seconds, it'll energize the solenoid here and allow the fuel pump to start pumping fuel through. But anyway, this will not come off until we get this whole bottom plate out. But we will go ahead and take the nut off here. I think it's a 10mm nut because it's just easier to get to right now. And then once we slide this whole plate off here, this fuel solenoid will actually slide off of there. But again, like I say, there's the pump. We'll have to get these banjo bolts loose on each side. For the fuel lines. Over here there's a very small line right here that actually goes from the pump up to the fuel stand. So the pump comes out and it pushes the fuel up here and it goes to the fuel nozzle, which poof, atomizes it all. But we'll get all the wiring and everything out of here and then we'll get this plate out. Once we get that whole assembly out, then we can access the fuel pump itself. There's a couple of gears on that. We'll be replacing one of them, as well as the pump. And like I said, once we get this whole thing out, then we'll be down to just the actual blower assembly itself, where we can access the motor and the actual blower fan and all that. And there's some parts down in there also that we're going to be replacing since we had the whole thing tore apart anyways. But I had reached out, I had heard numerous times about Roger Burke and his knowledge on these things and parts and stuff like that. And I don't know, I reached out to them several times trying to ask about everything that was needed and what all we would have to get, and I had no responses back. I don't know if he's out of business or he gave it up or what the situation is, but I finally had to give up and move on to another source. So I reached out to another source, John Carrillo, and I sent the same inquiries, and within 2 hours, I had a response just like that. Talked to them a couple of times about what all we needed for the pump and to make sure we were getting the right pump and all the parts and everything like that. And I placed the order, and here we are 2 days later, and here's the parts. Well, some of them. I have some other stuff too, but this is just the main parts that we got. Obviously, the number one culprit here is the fuel pump. Seemingly so innocent, but I think the root cause of all our problems. Since we've got it tore apart, we're going to go ahead and replace the drive coupling. We got all new rubber bushings here for the fuel line grommets. The wiring over here. I don't think any of this stuff has ever been replaced on ours, and well, they're not like rock hard, but they're nowhere near as soft as the new ones. I can tell you that. But once this assembly goes into there, you don't want any air leaking at all. So we're just going to replace all those. And as Mike states, you know, any kind of air leakage at all will throw off your air-fuel mixture and just lead to a host of problems. So we're here, we might as well do it. Like I said, once we get all the fuel pump and everything off and we get down into the actual blower assembly, there's some bearings and stuff down in there. So we went ahead and got all new bearings. There's a bushing that goes between the bearings. All new clips, O-rings for it. We got another new fuel nozzle, which I guess we'll go ahead and use it. This one is brand spanking new. Again, we were trying to find the problem, but went ahead and got a new disc for the photo cell, even though, again, there's nothing wrong with the one that's on there, but this one's nice and dirty, and, well, this one came in the kit as a 5-year service, and it's all nice and pretty. So a multitude of some wafer spring washers and stuff like that will all go in there, but we'll get this thing tore apart, see what else we can see. But I'm pretty sure, again, looking at it already, I mean, you can see how much diesel is it's just coated on everything in here, the pump, all the wiring. But we're gonna have to get it completely tore apart and clean everything up, and then we'll get it all put back together. Okay, so as you can see, we've got all the wire disconnected off here. We got the photo cell off. It's really not too complicated to get that stuff off here. There's a little clamp right here, just a 10mm bolt that actually clamps around the side right here, and that's what holds your igniters right here. And then there's just a snap ring right here that is right here on the end of the nozzle. Once you get that snap ring off, that clamp off of there, get all your grommets slid up out of here on your wire, then you can just slide that photo disc right off. Like I say, here's that fuel solenoid I was talking about, which I said incorrectly earlier. It was 10 millimeter. It's actually 8 millimeter nut. But you'll notice that the solenoid will not come off of there until after you get that plate up out of there. So we'll slide that off after that. Once you get it all stripped down to this point, literally it's just, these are 14 millimeter. You loosen up the banjo bolts for the fuel return, the fuel supply line. And then over here, there's this small line right here. That's 8 millimeter. And that's what actually directs the fuel out of here up to the nozzle. So we're going to get these, there's 4 Allen screws in here. They're just 4 millimeter. They are kind of tight, so use the correct size wrench. All right, it's a socket head cap screw. So anyway, we're just going to get all those popped loose. We'll get those screws out of there. We'll lift this plate out of there, and we'll be back. All right, so we got the four socket head screws out of here. And like I say, we went ahead and loosened these lines up previously because it is definitely much easier to do it while it's all bolted down. But after you get those out, you literally just, voila, there it is. So that's the drive gear for the pump. This is the, the driven gear for the pump. Whoops, got pieces just fell off. This is the main drive gear that comes off the little electric motor that's in here that runs the blower fan and everything like that. But what we're after was that fuel pump right there. And the reason why you got to tear the whole thing apart is there's the screws that holds it on. So we will get, well, I'm sorry, those are the screws that holds the fuel nozzle, the fuel stand on, which we'll have to get off. But anyway, to get the fuel pump out of there, long story short, is you got to take the whole thing apart because there's the little tiny screws right there that actually bolt the pump down. So we're going to get this all blown apart also, and we'll continue moving on into the blower section. Well, here it is, completely blown apart. All the little pieces. We're going to replace these 2 bearings down in here. This is the other half that goes on from the bottom. Your blower assembly actually rides through these bearings nice and smooth and quiet. These didn't seem to be bad, but again, as Mike states, with all the excessive diesel that's been blowing through here, you know, it's very easily to soak these things, and we've already got it apart. Fuel shutoff solenoid. Here's your little drive gear. Goes on the end, and when the blower turns, that's what turns the fuel pump. But we got the stand all off, and pulled the fuel nozzle out, and this is the shaft for your fuel shutoff solenoid to go onto. We're going to replace the O-ring and such forth in that and get this all cleaned up. There's nothing wrong with the stand or anything like that. The plate that the fuel pump and the stand bolts to. Here's the actual fuel pump. And if you can see, maybe not, but that is just raw diesel all over the face of that and all over the inside of where that little C-clip is. So, and you can see, I mean, it's just, the whole pump is just soaked in diesel. So hopefully, after watching Mike's video over there at Zmotorsports and him explaining what's been going on with these things, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But here's the blower assembly itself. This is the half of the coupling that drives the little fan. Here's the other half. We went ahead and got a new coupling. And then, like I say, all new grommets and everything like that to go in here. But we'll start getting everything cleaned back up. Get the new fuel pump put on there. Get everything assembled back together. Put the new bearings in. Get it all put back together. And hopefully, I can learn to have a love relationship with our hydr-hot system. Okay guys, so we started getting all the pieces all cleaned up here so that we can get the new bearings put in and the plate and everything put back on our blower assembly. But when we started cleaning this up and we started paying close attention to it, upon inspection, we found a hairline crack right along the edge here where the tie-down bolts are that bolt it back into the hydr-hot housing, all right? And that would be right here. No big deal. We're going to get this thing all cleaned up, and we're actually going to put this ear back on it, and it is going to be good as new. once we get it all cleaned up and get the ear attached, it will look new. So let's make that happen. So in 3, 2, 1. So bam, look, just like that. It looks good as new. We've got the ear attached back on there. We've got this thing all cleaned up. I mean, you would swear it's brand new. That's because it is. This is just cast aluminum. There's really no way to fix that. I'm assuming that one of the previous owners, which there was only one owner, but somehow a maintenance facility or something had taken this piece out for some reason or other, and when they went to tighten these back up into the housing, they got it too tight. This thing breaks very easily. It's no big deal. This is part number 5022567A. I'll put it right down here in the video. These are readily available. It's just a Webasto part. And I was going to tell y'all also, if you need parts like this, don't limit yourself just to RV outlets for these parts for your hydr-hot systems. This system is actually used very widely in the marine industry as well. A lot of boats, full-time liveaboards, charter vessels and everything like that use these same heating systems. So we actually reached out to a marine company and got a replacement. All of the RV kind of specific ones, they were all around the same, 150, 140 bucks, upwards up as high as $240 on Amazon. I got this for $92 from Sure Marine Services out of Seattle, Washington. Readily available. They have a ton of parts for these Webastos. So on this side of it, it may not necessarily look like what you have in your RV, but these burner housings and the blower motor housings and stuff like that is the same piece. So anyway, we ordered this, had it in 3 days. Regular USPS shipping, free shipping. $96, I think, total is what it was. So anyway, we're going to get the rest of the parts cleaned up, and we're going to get this thing put back together. Okay, so we got everything all cleaned up. Our plate here for our fuel pump and our stand go back on. Looks great. Of course, our blower assembly itself, the back half of our blower housing all cleaned up. This is our new blower housing. Sorry, that's just part of it. Our new blower housing. Anyway, we already got the bearings put into it that came in the rebuild kit. So all it is, if you can see right there, it's a snap ring and then your bearing. And then once you get your snap ring in there, you can just push your bearing all the way down through. There's a spacer that goes in there, and then you put your top bearing onto there, and then there's a little wafer spring washer looking thing and your clip that goes on there. And once you get all that pushed down in there, that clip actually holds a little bit of tension there on that wafer washer, and it keeps the bearings kind of pushed together. So anyway, there's nothing to it. It's very simple to put these things back together. So now we are going to work on getting our blower assembly back on there, and we'll get our housing put back together, and then we'll move on to getting the blower motor and everything back on there. This piece right here, there are a couple of washers right there that go on there. And again, thanks to Mike over at Zmotorsports, we now know that those are called Belleville washers, and he explains exactly how those work very well in his video, but it actually puts a little bit of tension because once you slide this thing in there, you can move it ever so slightly in and out. So that's what those washers are for. And then once we get it set properly with the, it came with a new nylock nut, a new gear and everything. Once we get it all put back together, this thing's going to be good as new. Okay, so here's our housing. We got our bearings all back in there. We've got our blower assembly stuck back on there, our fan assembly essentially. We have, there's a washer that goes on there first, and then we actually have a new gear that came with the kit and a new nylock nut. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start tightening this nut down ever so slightly. Okay, and I don't know if we can catch this on camera or not, but let me show you here. Once you get that thing back down in there, it will actually I hope you can hear that or not, but it will actually have a little bit of slack and it will move in and out. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to tension this nut down ever so slightly, a little bit at a time, until we get this thing to just rub. Not like full on contact, but just barely touching the housing. And once we get it to barely touch, we're going to back this nut off. I think Mike said it's about 1/4 of a turn. It's kind of a feel thing. If you back it off and it still wants to rub and touch just a little bit, ever so slightly, just back the nut off a little bit more. But you don't want to back it off too much and get too much slop in here. So all we're really trying to do is just take the tension just out of this to where it does not contact, but we close up this air gap between the two pieces. All right, and then essentially what's going to happen is that's your fan assembly in there. So if this gap is too big, it won't work as efficiently as it should, because remember, it's going to draw air in, go through the vanes, and push the air out through the fuel nozzle so that it atomizes the fuel and the air mixture correctly. All right, so we'll get that all done, and then we will get our housing put back on it. And after that, we have a new coupling right here. We'll get our coupling put back there, and we'll start mounting the motor back up. Also, one little trade secret tip that Mike also shared. God, that guy is amazing, man. You really should check out his channel, Zmotorsports. This housing, while he says it looks symmetrical on all the screws, you just never really know for sure. So before we took all this apart, we actually marked this thing. And I don't think you can see it here, but I just got two little tiny scratch marks on there. And of course we have a new bottom, but I just took my old one here, I found the marks, and I just oriented this the way that was, and then we'll stick all this back together. Amazing video, man. That guy, he shares so many secrets about these things. And they're really not hard. So again, if you're not afraid of a little bit of work, patience, pay attention to what you take apart, there's no reason why you can't fix this stuff yourself and save a ton of money. Okay, so we got the back side of our housing put back on there. We will get our socket head cap screws put back in there. They're 4mm. Man, these dudes were tight when we took this thing apart. Oh my goodness. But anyway, snug them back down. Don't get carried away. Again, have some sense about you. If you want to try to over torque them and snap them off, well, that's up to you. But we're just going to give them a good tightening back down and stick our coupling back on there. Ooh, smooth and quiet. Okay, so there it is. We've gotten them all tightened up. Again, these things were like ridiculously tight when we took them out. And anyway, I just used a little bit of blue thread locker on them and then didn't get carried away when I put them back together. Red thread locker is a little bit more of a permanent thread locker. I don't intend this on being permanent. I mean, you're going to have to take it back apart again someday, you know, for maintenance or bearings or to clean everything up again. So anyway, just a little bit of blue thread locker. It's not going to come loose. Okay, so we've got our blower completely assembled. So now we're ready to start getting our housing back over it to get all our wiring and harnesses and everything like that. So an easy way to remember how this housing orients onto this assembly is, first off, this is where your coils bolt back onto, okay, with your ignition leads right here, okay? There's a little opening right here, which is where your wiring harness is going to pass back through so that you can plug it back into the coils, okay? But remember, all of this harness is actually inside this, so we have to get it from inside back to the outside, okay? So you orient this thing so that your coils line up with your slots here for your ignition leads, okay? And then there is a groove in the housing right here. There's only one groove, just like this. That's where your wiring harness is going to lay, because remember, again, it's coming from the inside. It has to come back, and it has to get back to the outside. The O-ring is going to go over the top of it because the O-ring is what seals to the housing. So it's a little tricky, but I just fished it underneath it. But again, this wiring harness will lay into the groove, and then the O-ring will go on top of it, and all of that will go back together. These wires here, once you get it a little bit down in there, you will pass them through this hole and out. And then you can plug them back into the coils when you mount that, and you can actually push the connectors back into there, okay? So we're gonna get that all put back together. Okay, so it will look something just like that when you get it back on there, okay? I went ahead and stuck this back on with the screw because this is very, very important. We do not want to lose it. This is the actual tool that you will use to readjust your igniters. So just so I don't lose it, I stuck it back on there. But see our harness come out of our housing right here? We have it all laid out here. And then these are leads right here that will go back to our ignition coils, and they just come out the bottom of the housing right here. All right, so now we can start working on getting the stand and everything built back for the fuel pump. We still have to put some high temp grease on our gear here, and then we'll get all that put back down in there. And then once we do that, this harness right here for the photocell plate, or whatever that little deal is called, and our left ignition lead here will pass through the same grommet to get the electrical back in here and the ignition lead. And then of course our right side ignition lead here will just pass up and go through this one. Okay, there it is. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, so we're starting to reassemble our pump and our stand here, and we put our stem back on here for our fuel shutoff solenoid. We put a new O-ring on there. And what we've done initially is we've just left everything loose. Okay, there's no screws in this at all. It's just sitting on there. Same thing with the pump. We just got the screws sitting in the hole, but the pump is actually loose to the plate. And the reason we did that was it's a little tricky to get this line back in there. Okay, because this line actually goes on up into the pump and on up into the stand. It's flared in there. So if you put these pieces on there tight, you will not get this line back in there. Okay, and you don't want to bend it. It's very brittle. This line only goes in one way. Honestly, the only thing that I can really help you with on that is this leg right here of the line versus this leg. This one is longer than this one, okay? So the long leg, it goes to the pump. If you swap it around, it will not go back on there, okay? We just got these started loose. They are not tight, okay? Once we get these started loose, then we'll put our screws in our pump and our screws in our stand, tighten them down, then we can snug the line down, okay? 3mm socket heads cap screws for the fuel pump, okay? And then the fuel stand itself bolts on from the bottom, and it's just 2 Phillips head screws. Okay, just like that. Now we got them tightened down, we can go ahead and take a 8mm and we can go ahead and snug our line up. Okay, so we got our gear put back on there, our little snap ring, focus, all right, for the pump. We went ahead and tightened our stem back up. We've got our lines back on here for the fuel, new crush washer, your banjo fitting, your line here, another new crush washer, and then your banjo bolt. And they're loose. See, we want to do our final adjustment once we get them in there. Same thing on this side, new washers and everything. The lines, the one with the big arc in it here, goes on the side with the fuel pressure adjustment screw. You really shouldn't have to adjust that. As you can see, it has a paint mark on it. They set these kind of what you want to call factory calibration, really and truly. Not saying they're always perfect, but normally they're pretty darn close. So if it has a paint mark on it like that, if you change that, and if you ever had a warranty issue or whatever, you know, that's what that's for. But anyway, we got everything kind of roughed back up here. We'll get the high temp grease put back in there on our drive gear, and we'll lube up our gear here a little bit, and then we'll get this piece slid back down in there, and we will move on. Okay, so where we're at is we had our lines kind of loosely assembled on the plate, and we got our new grommets put on there that came with the rebuild kit. We slipped our fuel solenoid back on there. Don't forget that, because once you get that plate down in there, you will not be able to get this back on there. Okay, the wiring for it is going to come through the grommet over here with our ignition lead. So we just got that looped in there for right now. We'll get our new grommets put on there, get our coils mounted back up and everything like that. And so what we did after that is we dropped the plate back down in there. Now be very careful when you put that plate back down in there, okay? Don't force it down. You may have to wiggle it and get the gear. You may have to pick it up and turn the gear a little bit to get the gears to mesh so that it'll just slip right back down in there. And once it's down in there all the way, this little gap right here will close up around the air port. Okay, so remember, this thing is going to be sucking in air through here, going through that fan assembly, and then it's like a little turbo, right? And then it's going to force it out through here, and it's going to blow that air out. That fuel nozzle sits right here. It atomizes that fuel with the air into your burn chamber. Your little igniters will be up here, and voila, flame on. But we got this all tightened down. We got our solenoid put back on there, the little 8mm nut here, don't forget that. When you put that back on there with the washer, you're not trying to torque this dude down, you're just trying to get it where it just holds it on there. It's just to keep it from coming off. After that, we are going to move on, start getting our coils put back on there so we can get our ignition leads up through there. We actually got new ignition leads with the kit. Not that these are bad, they're not arcing or anything like that, but they're old. They've been on there for a long time. They're kind of hard and brittle, and anyway, we got new ones, so we're going to replace them. Why not? It came in the rebuild kit. So we're going to get that all set up, and here those are right here. It's not bad. These little fittings all come off there, and they just kind of screw back into there and press on and stuff like that. So we're going to get those changed out, and then we are going to move on to getting all the electrical set back on here. We got to get our little disc here. We need to change it out. We got a new one in the kit right here. We'll get that changed out, and then we'll start routing this wiring back in here so we can get this thing. It's ultimately going to end up kind of over here like that, and we'll get our clamps put back on there and such forth. So let's get a few things together here, and we'll get that all ready to go, and then we will be back and we'll move on with this little project. Okay, so we're going to replace our ignition leads now. So this one is already the new one installed. So the way that you get these things apart is, this is your coil terminal right here, and that stem down in there is actually threaded. Okay, so the way you get this thing apart is you simply unscrew the ignition lead out of the coil. Okay, once you get the ignition lead off, this is what you'll have left. Okay, so all you do on this end is you just pull the boot off, just like that. Okay, on this end down here where the actual electrode is, what you're going to want to do is peel your boot back just like this. Okay, and I hope you can see this because it is tiny, tiny, tiny. Once you get your boot pulled back, there is a little tiny, tiny clip right here. Okay, just grab your needle nose, pull the clip off, just like that. Okay, and then the electrode will actually just slide out of there. Okay, and then what you're left with is just the inner metal piece and your boot. So you can go ahead and start working your boot off of there. It is tough. Okay, get your boot off of there, and then this piece right here will also unscrew out of the ignition lead. Okay, just like that. So you can see it's threaded right there, and there's your old lead. Okay, it's not that they're cracked or anything like that. They're just old, they're starting to get hard, and the install kit came with new ignition leads, so we might as well replace them, right? Why not? Boom. Okay, so to go back together, we're just going to go the opposite direction. We have our boot, we have our new ignition lead. We're simply going to press it back into there, just like that. On the opposite end down here, same thing. We're going to work our boot on there, which is tough again, okay? Don't think it's just going to fall on there. It is tough to get that boot back through there, okay? Bear with me here. We're going to get it. Just keep working it. And eventually, you're going to end up with that, okay? And again, our threaded end, we just simply press it into the wire a little bit and start threading it back in there, just like that. And it will get a little tight, So all we're trying to do is just bury the thread into the wire, not the shoulder right here, okay? It just goes till the end of the thread right there, okay? Once we get it in there, we're going to end up with, voila, just like that. Now I'm left-handed. Not that it makes a difference, but it's just the way I work, right? So I'm going to end up with a little notch right here that's cut into the wire end to my left, okay? We're going to take our electrode. We're going to clean up our ends a little bit here with some fine Scotch-Brite. Just get all that old junk off of there. Same thing down here, just any corrosion or diesel soot or anything that's left on there, carbon buildup. We're just going to get all that stuff cleaned off of there real good. What we end up with is a nice, shiny, new looking electrode, okay? Now to put it back together, again, I hope you can see this. I don't know if you're going to be able to or not, but there is a tiny, tiny groove cut in the end of the electrode right here. All right, that groove is ultimately going to need to end up with this notch that's cut in here. So the way we go back together is we just slip it back through there. We get our little clip here. Man, I'm blind and old, hard to see. And you don't want to lose this clip. Trust me, I've already done it several times, so that'll tell you how many times I actually took this part. Sorry, not giving away my trade secrets here. This is pretty much going to end up flush with the end of it right here. So all we need to do is, and bear with me, I may go out of camera here for just a second, I'll get back to it. We need to slide our clip back through the notch. Okay, careful not to lose it. We're just going to press that thing all the way back in there. Just like that. And then you can kind of wiggle this thing back and forth just a little bit to make sure that all the grooves are lined up. So I hope you can hear that. Okay? And that's all it is. That is all there is to replacing the ignition leads on this. Now comes the fun part, getting that boot back over the end here. So bear with me again. Just give it a little pull. Get it back over the wire. Going to fish it all back together. Get it all nice and lined up. And boom, there it is. One new ignition wire. And then to go back into the coil, like I say, the little end is threaded. All we got to do is give it a good shove on there and then screw that boob back together. Just like that. And just screw it down until you'll feel it bottom out. It's going to want to stop turning. Don't force it past that. Once you get to the bottom where it stops turning, it is bottomed out just like that. Sit it down, take your boot, slide it back down the wire, right over the end of the coil, just like that. New ignition leads. All right. So we're going to start working on getting the coil put back on there, getting the leads ran. We'll start getting the leads mounted back up, the actual ignition terminals on there set back. We'll take our little tool back off of here so we can adjust the electrodes. We'll get our clamp back on there, and we are almost there, folks. Okay, so we got our new coil with our new ignition leads set back on there, and remember earlier how we had passed those wires through the casing right there? So we just plugged them back in, and we passed our connectors back into the housing to protect those connection points right there. Set our coils back on here, and then of course our ignition lead right here will pass through our new grommet with our wiring harness, and we'll get that passed in through there, and then our other wire will get a new grommet put on it, and we'll get it passed into there. All right, so we'll just put the 4 screws back in here, and we'll move on. Okay, so we went ahead and put our new fuel nozzle in. We got our new photo plate here. We just took the it's just one little low screw you just take out, and that wiring connection slides out of there, and then you just slide it in and put the new plate on. No big deal. That's easy. We did make one crucial mistake, and I don't know if you noticed it earlier or not. I certainly didn't until I got ready to put the electrodes back together. I put the fuel solenoid shutoff valve on backwards. If you can see down in here, there's an indentation in it right here. I put it on backwards. I had it out here. That indentation is so that when your electrode goes back in there, if I can do this one-handed, bear with me here, gets a little difficult. That electrode will actually be over here like that. Whoops, there, like that. And it sits into that indentation. I put it on backwards, and my fault. I didn't pay attention to what I was doing, but anyway, we got it corrected. So all that is left now is to put our little tool right here, wherever I laid it down, right here. We will stick our little tool on there. It literally all it does is it just snaps over the end of the, you just snap it over the end of it and it sits all the way down on there. And then these two little notches right there that are cut out in it, your electrodes will actually sit right in those notches, and the tip will be just flush with the top surface here. And that's how you set your electrodes. And the only thing that holds those on there is just a little clamp right here. The electrodes just sit in it. The clamp goes right up against that. There's a little hole right there in the side of the stand. And then once you get the electrodes set, then you just tighten up the little 10mm bolt here, and that holds it. But that is it, man. This thing is completely back together. And wow, does it look a lot better than it did when we took it apart. That is for sure. But we're going to finish tidying up these last few little wire connections here, get the electrodes set, put the bracket back on there, and then this dude is ready to go back into its home with a new fuel pump. So as you can see, we've got our little tool. It just snaps right over the end of the nozzle. And when you get your electrodes lined up, it will be just like that. They will literally sit right in the notches. And that's how you know that they're aligned properly. So once we got them to rest right in the notches freely there, we just simply tightened up our 10mm bolt to hold our electrodes. Now this plate is supposed to be loose like this. Once you get it slid up into there, this will actually seat up against a piece in the burn tube, and it will actually hold it straight. So there you go. Everything is new. Grommets are in there. Those will get pressed back in there when we put them into the housing. Man, good as new. I'm so ready to get this thing put back in there and see what it can do. Hopefully it'll stop the smoking issue. Don't forget your tool, all right? And it just simply goes right back onto the side of the housing here with the screw so that it's always safe and sound. That way you don't ever lose it. Also forgot to mention something you may have noticed earlier too was I actually took the air inlet nozzle off of here, okay? And you'll notice there's a red mark at that screw. Don't mess with that. That is factory set for the proper air. You don't want to mess that up. The reason I took that off, and I didn't mention it earlier, was when you go to get this housing off of the blower case here, this O-ring in here is tight, and there's really no way to pry these pieces apart. So what I did was I just took the little housing off here, and I took a very soft rubber mallet, and I just ever so slightly tapped on this right here. Again, important, rubber mallet. Again, that's cast. It will break very easily. So anyway, we just tapped on it a couple of times. We got this seal to kind of break out, and then once we got it to start moving, it really was no big deal to get it fished on out of there. We sprayed some penetrating oil around it. I use Aerocoil. Works great. But we sprayed some of that around there and got it down in there, and the O-ring loosened it all up and everything like that, and then we were simply able to just reach in here and just press it out. So that's why that piece is off there. We're going to get it stuck back on there, and then we'll chunk this thing back in the motorhome. All right, so all we got to do is just stick it back down in there. We already got our fuel lines hooked back up here. Once we slide it back up in the actual burner tube here, we'll take a look at that. There's the burner tube. And then, like I say, we just have these little T-bolts or J-bolts or whatever they're called. There's two of them. There's one right here and one right up there. And they will just hook back into these little ears right here and just ever so slightly snug those down. Don't get carried away. You saw what happened to this housing, right? And once we get it bolted back up in there, then all we got to do is we'll plug our wiring harness back in here. We got, there's a plug here, and let's see, there's another one up here, right there, and then another one right there. And they are just color-coded. You just match them back up. And then our main harness connector there will go back on our module. We'll slap our module back into the bracket here, and we can fire this dude up. Oh, before we go, remember earlier in the video I said about all the soot built up? Look at that. That is how much smoke and raw diesel fuel has been just pouring out of this thing. It is ridiculous. It has this bay absolutely horribly nasty. So we're going to have to spend a lot of time getting all that cleaned back up. But that's what all that is from, is how bad this thing smokes whenever you fire it back up. Anyway, moving on, get it back together. Let's see what happens. there you go. Smoke show is over. I do apologize for how long the video was, but I was just trying to be thorough and maybe we can help someone else out there. You just have no idea how embarrassing it was to pull into some nice RV resort and fire up the hydr-hot and, well, let the coal rolling begin. But thank you, Mike, with Zmotorsports. You are an absolute tremendous wealth of information, and I truly do appreciate you subscribing to our little old YouTube channel and helping us out. Maybe this will help somebody else out if you have a hydronic system that is just smoking like a freight train also. So, a little time, a little patience, and you too can save yourself a ton of money. We'll see you on the next one, and remember, we still have a long, long way to go.